Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the epic rise, some truly fascinating structural paradoxes, and the eventual fall of the medieval Chola dynasty. We'll be drawing directly on Dr. Rahul S. Karat's deep dive into pre-modern South Asia to trace the arc of a civilization that, honestly, completely transformed the Indian Ocean world. Okay, picture this. Imagine a pre-modern Indian state capable of launching a massive naval expedition to conquer 12,000 islands. 12,000. And this was way back in the 11th century. That staggering number represents their Maldives expedition, and it's a display of early maritime projection that just completely shatters our conventional expectations of what medieval agrarian states could actually pull off. So that immediately brings us to our core mystery for today. How exactly did a modest, relatively small chieftaincy down in the Kaveri Delta transform into a subcontinental and maritime superpower? I mean, how do you go from local feuds to dominating trade routes all the way to China?
Section 1. Rise of the Cholas, from the Kaveri Delta to regional dominance. To really get a handle on their phenomenal growth, we have to rewind to their pretty obscure origins in the fertile Tamil country, rising up from the shadows of rivalries between the Pallava and Pandya kingdoms. Their expansion was just relentless. It kicks off in 848 CE when Vijayala seizes the strategically vital city of Thanjavur. Just a few decades later, around 903 CE, they swallow the Pallava kingdom whole. Right after that, Parantaka I is occupying Madurai. The momentum here is unbelievable, and it builds right up to the ascension of Rajaraja I in 985 CE, which sets the stage for those unprecedented overseas strikes.
And that momentum catapults us into Section 2, the imperial zenith, zooming in on the golden age of Rajaraja I and his son Rajendra I. Now, what is truly wild here is the sheer audacious scale of ambition these two kings unleashed. Rajendra I didn't stop at completing the conquest of Sri Lanka. Nope, his armies marched over 1,000 miles up the eastern coast of India, literally crossing the Ganges River in Bengal. He actually took on the title, the Chola who took the Ganga. But wait, it gets crazier. In 1025 CE, he launched a massive punishing naval strike all the way across the Bay of Bengal. The target of that strike? The Srivijaya thalassocracy. Now, this was a huge maritime empire that had a total stranglehold on the Malacca and Sunda Straits. Modern historians, Dr. Karat included, see this incredible 1025 CE naval expedition not just as blind imperial conquest, but as a calculated, commercially motivated trade war. The Cholas essentially wanted to break Srivijaya's grip to secure vital merchant supply chains for their own South Indian guilds who were trading with China. So how did they pull all this off? Let's get into Section 3, the engine of empire, and look at the dual-engine society that sustained this incredible reach. The crucial thing to wrap our heads around is the stark structural contrast that defined the Chola state. On the one hand, you have this highly centralized monarchy. We're talking absolute god kings with grandiose titles, intense court rituals, and just immense military power. But on the other hand, perfectly balancing that out is an incredibly sophisticated, decentralized, and self-governing local village system. It was this dual engine, autocracy at the absolute top, deeply engaged local governance at the bottom, that gave the empire its fiscal and administrative backbone. And to keep corruption and powerful local interests in check, these villages used something called the Kuda Volai system, which we know about from famous inscriptions at a place called Uttara Merer. Forget modern attack ads and campaign spending, right? This was a literal lottery procedure. They'd write the names of eligible candidates on palm leaves, drop those tickets into a pot, and a young child would randomly draw the names in front of the entire village assembly to elect committee officials. Seriously, what a remarkable achievement in the history of pre-modern local governance. That solid administrative foundation beautifully paved the way for Section 4. Master traders and artisans. All that local stability fueled immense cultural and commercial wealth. 80 tons. That is the staggering weight of a single monolithic dome stone crowning the massive Brihadiswarar temple, completed around 1010 CE by Rajaraja I. Think about that for a second. Hoisting an 80-ton piece of solid granite over 60 meters into the air requires way more than just religious devotion. It takes spectacular engineering prowess and a massive, well-organized labor force, all fueled by a booming economy. Alongside that kind of monumental architecture, Chola artisans were busy perfecting the lost wax casting process to create exquisite,
dynamic bronze sculptures. The absolute rock star of these is the Chola Nataraja, Shiva depicted as the lord of the cosmic dance, captured in a moment of perfectly poised, dynamic balance. These bronzes weren't just statues, by the way. They were processional icons. And today, they remain globally recognized masterpieces of world religious art. And this cultural boom was backed by an absolute economic powerhouse. On the commercial front, powerful corporate merchant guilds like the Ayavol 500 operated across international boundaries. These guys were so powerful, they even maintained their own armed escorts. They exported local textiles, pearls, and spices, and brought back Southeast Asian aromatics, plus Chinese silk and ceramics, mostly routing through bustling major ports like Nagapattinam. But we don't just have to take the Chola's word for it. We have official Chinese Songshi court records from 1077 CE that detail the arrival of massive, highly organized Chola trade embassies made up of several hundred members. These were very serious diplomatic missions, specifically designed to formalize maritime trade and ensure all those lucrative goods kept flowing smoothly right across the Indian Ocean. But, as always happens, things eventually turn. Moving into Section 5, Anatomy of a Decline, we see that despite all this vast wealth, structural cracks were starting to show. This was not an overnight collapse. It was a slow, inevitable, and frankly fascinating structural tragedy. Historians pinpoint a fatal structural flaw right at the heart of the empire: a shrinking tax base. Over the centuries, Chola kings granted more and more tax-exempt villages to brahmanas and temples to consolidate elite support. The unintended consequence of that? Well, they slowly, almost invisibly, starved the imperial state of its vital revenue base, even as the costs of running that massive empire remained incredibly high. When you combine that shrinking revenue with a perfect storm of external pressures, the picture of their decline becomes crystal clear. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, this sheer lack of funds tragically collided with extremely costly, draining wars against the Hoysalas and Chalukyas up north. Meanwhile, down in the south, their old regional rivals, the Pandyas, were steadily regaining their strength. Throw in some successive weak rulers and internal disputes, and the empire experienced a gradual, painful fragmentation. Which brings us to our final section, an enduring legacy beyond political borders. By 1279 CE, Chola sovereignty formally dissolved into Pandya overlordship. But their story? Far from over. Their immense cultural legacy survived the political collapse entirely. Those massive, towering Gopuram gateways you see in photos of South Indian temples today, those are direct descendants of Chola design. Their bronze casting canons of iconography and technique totally lived on. Plus, their administrative vocabulary for village self-governance explicitly inspired modern India's Panchayati Raj systems. That means the blueprint of this medieval empire is still impacting millions of lives in the 21st century. And their patronage of Tamil literature deeply shaped regional devotional bhakti traditions that are thriving to this very day. Which leaves us with a fascinating, provocative paradox to consider. Can the enduring cultural beauty of a civilization ever truly be separated from the structurally flawed political systems that built it? The political machine of the Cholas ultimately starved itself, but the cultural and administrative innovations it funded outlasted the empire by centuries. It certainly makes you look at those towering temple walls and exquisite bronzes in a completely different light, doesn't it?